Why, hello there friends, how are you guys doing today? My name's Emma, I'm the Bookish Princess, so I gotta be honest with you. I meant to film this video earlier this week, and somehow it just, every day was too busy, and then it got to Friday, and I was like, okay, I'll film it after I get home from work, but first I'll have a cup of tea and read for a little bit, and then I'll get the camera out. Of course, I ended up getting carried away by the book, and I was like, the video can wait till tomorrow. But I'm determined to get it up today. I wanted to fill you guys in on the books I've been reading in the month of May, the books I'm planning to read in the month of June. A bunch of them are ebooks, which is why my stack is a fairly modest one. Let's get started. So in a couple of my past reading wrap-ups, I've been mentioning the author of Lady Winifred Fortescue, a little bit of a tongue twister. She wrote the book Perfume from Provence, and she wrote a couple sequels to that, Sunset House and Trampled Lilies. I've been so enjoying those books. They talk about her when she and her husband moved to France, and they renovate a house in Provence and her life there, and then the start of World War II, and she ends up escaping to England. That is in Trampled Lilies. This month I did finish There's Rosemary, There's Rue, which is another book by Lady Winifred Fortescue. She's talking about her life before she moved to Provence, and I thought her life was fascinating just in Provence, setting up her house there, you know, working as a writer. But really her entire life is just absolutely fascinating, and she's so down to earth. She's never like braggy, and she could so easily become like braggy and like, you know, name drop. This book starts with her childhood growing up at the rectory with her family. When she left school, she became an actress on the London stage, which is pretty amazing. You hear about her, you know, touring around with different plays and working with playwrights and different actors and actresses. And she was actually doing quite well, and then she met her husband and got married. Her husband was the royal historian at like Windsor Castle. He also wrote this incredibly long, impressive series on the British Army, which I actually kind of want to go out and read at least a little of that. It's like many volumes long. But he sounds like such a cool guy, and it's so cool to hear about their life at Windsor Castle and in London. If you watch the movie Mary Poppins, there's a really fun, very small, but really interesting connection between Lady Winifred Fortescue and the Mary Poppins movie. So Winifred's husband was working very hard on this, you know, incredibly time-consuming project about the British Army, and she ended up going back to work to try to earn more money for them. First, she started out as like an interior designer, designing people's homes, and then she ended up becoming a fashion designer, and oh my gosh, I wish there were more pictures out there of the clothing she created. I've tried to Google it, but I didn't find very many, but she described this like fashion show that they had in their back garden, and like all these beautiful lights, and like, oh my gosh, it just sounds absolutely stunning, and as far as I can tell, there aren't any pictures. I just love hearing the story of her life, all the different, you know, struggles and challenges she meets with such a great attitude. There's Rosemary, There's Rue, which just made me fall in love with Lady Winifred Fortescue that much more. And I think actually one thing I did find online is that there are a couple more books after, you know, after World War II when she goes back to France. So I definitely want to try to look those up. I know the earlier books are on Kindle, which is really great. I'll link them down in the description below. So if you've been watching my recent videos or you follow me over on Instagram, you'll know that my family just got back from a really fun Walt Disney World trip. I did manage to read a couple of ebooks on my Kindle. They were both by Elizabeth Cadell, who is a lovely British author. I just love her stories so much. There's like a little bit of a mystery, a romance, but it's not too fluffy. There are also lots of really interesting observations about people. In these two books, actually, there were lots of really interesting observations about women and women's lives. So the two books were Game in Diamonds and The Corner Shop. I think I like Game in Diamonds just a little bit better. It was set in an English village, but they end up kind of uncovering this mystery from the past. And I just love the cast of characters. And then The Corner Shop also starts in England, but then moves to Paris, France. Again, a little bit of a mystery. Both charming. Here's one quote that I highlighted in Game of Diamonds. I wish someone would stand up and say out loud that running a house is a more rewarding job than sitting in an office clanking on a typewriter. But there's company in an office and not much responsibility. So when a girl finds herself on her own, cooking and washing up with no married colleagues, she gets claustrophobia and runs out on the first real responsibility she's ever faced. You could sweep away most girls in most offices and replace them in a week, but a wife and mother? Have you got any sensible suggestions to contribute? The two characters are having this really interesting discussion about women in professional situations versus women in the home. And this book, I think this one was written in the 1970s, but it's so interesting that we're still having the same conversations today. And I do feel like too often the work of a stay-at-home mom is sort of disregarded and swept under the rug, and like our culture just sort of places more value on women getting out in the workforce, which both of those things are valuable. It just seems like too often one is held up at the expense of the other, and it's like they both need to coexist, and we need to recognize the value in both of them. But I really liked Elizabeth Caddell's observations on like both sides. The book that I finished reading yesterday instead of filming this video was by another of my favorite authors, D.E. Stevenson. It was The Four Graces. I have read this one before. It's actually kind of a sequel to the Miss Bunkle series. If you haven't read the Miss Bunkle series, it's absolutely amazing. It starts with Miss Bunkle's book, and then there are two after that that focus on Miss Bunkle. The Four Graces is really unique because you see Miss Bunkle in the beginning and like all the characters you've seen in those other three books, but then the story takes a turn and instead follows these four Graces. Mr. Grace is the pastor of this village, and the four Graces are his four daughters, and it's so interesting to get to know them. The first time I read it, there are a lot of characters, and the plot is a little bit wandering, and the first time I read it, I remember being a little bit confused, like who's who and what's happening here, but I still did really enjoy it, and I think the second time I enjoyed it even more because I kind of knew where things were going. The four daughters are so charming, and especially the second time I felt like I knew each one, whereas the first time they a little bit blend together. I think I would put D.E. Stevenson a little bit higher on my list than Elizabeth Caddell. Although they're both fantastic, D.E. Stevenson actually doesn't have quite as much of the mystery element. She does have those just really interesting little observations sprinkled throughout that really make you kind of stop and think. I ended up highlighting so many things in my Kindle edition just because there were so many beautifully put things, so many quotations from different books that like she doesn't always tell you where the quotation is from, but still it's fun that the Graces are obviously so well read and so literate. In fact, at one point she mentions that one of the characters is trying to remember where they know this quote from, and they say, and she says, it was a pity she hadn't been able to find the quotation and so learn the context, but perhaps it was just as well because the context might spoil it. I know my family has just a very vast patois of random phrases from TV shows, from books, and sometimes we forget the original context, but the quote becomes absorbed into our memes. It's fun to see their family. Just such a great camaraderie. And their father, the pastor, is so good, kind of going out into the community. He's always available, and he has so many interesting things to say. Religion is a kind of scientific research, and every faith and creed is part of the truth. No creed does more than shadow imperfectly forth some one side of the truth. I can't remember who said that, but it was well said. There's another quotation. And in this case, Sal remembers it's Father Hall in John Inglesant. I kind of want to like stop and, you know, look up every single quote she mentions in every single book because I haven't read a whole bunch of them. She also uses some great words like peroration and imbroglio. Also benison, which is kind of like benediction, like a blessing. But there was just one other scene with the pastor, Mr. Grace, that I thought I'd tell you guys about. So he's meeting some newcomers to the village, and Mrs. Smith is the lady he's meeting, and she's inviting him and his daughters over for a drink one night. She says, it would be much nicer if they could drop in some evening about 7 for a drink, and you too, of course, if you don't think it very wicked. I see nothing very wicked in it, said Mr. Grace in surprise. She smiled. Oh, I'm so glad you're broad-minded. I hope you're broad-minded in every way. No, said Mr. Grace. No, she exclaimed in amazement. Not in the sense you mean, I'm afraid, said Mr. Grace firmly. I've noticed that nowadays when people speak of being broad-minded, they really mean muddle-headed or lacking in principles, or possibly lacking the strength to stand up for any principles they may have. Nowadays, people are anxious to appear worse than they are. I like that he like says what he thinks, even though she obviously wanted him to say the reverse. And she's kind of mocking him, like trying to provoke him. They're at a village fete, which, oh my gosh, the whole village fete is so much fun. Another one of my favorite parts of the village fete scene was the ankle competition, which one of the sisters enters, and it's just so charming, so sweet. I loved that book. It's definitely making me want to go back and reread the entire Miss Bunkle series because I haven't reread that in a little while. I ended up doing a number of rereads this month. I did reread Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. It was just, I just felt like, you know what, it's been too long since I last read Jane Austen. I feel like I need to pick one up and read it again. And it was just, Absolutely charming and wonderful as always. I was talking to my friend Michelle recently. She's reading Pride and Prejudice, and she was saying it's a little difficult going. And I can totally see that, especially the first time, because Jane Austen's language is absolutely gorgeous. And in many ways, I think it is kind of timeless, but it is also quite different from the language you hear today. So it can kind of take a while to sort of soak it in. I think it's after you've read it a couple times that you really enjoy it, and it's kind of like, because you know it so well and you know kind of who's who and what's going on, that allows you to kind of pick up on all these tiny little beautiful things, beautiful, you know, sentences or ideas that you might not have had kind of the attention to notice on the first reading. When she's describing Mrs. Dashwood, so Marianne and Eleanor's mother at one point, and she says that she had that expectation of happiness, which was happiness itself, which I thought was fantastic. Like, even if you're not in a great situation, just expecting things to change, expecting things to be better, is it in itself, you know, making it better already. So, can't go wrong with Jane Austen. Another favorite author who I feel like it's been far too long since I've read is Elizabeth Goudge. I love her so much. The Little White Horse and The City of Bells. There's one book of hers that I started, but I just couldn't get into it, so I put it down, and I'm thinking I'm going to try it again this summer. It's Green Dolphin Street. This was actually made into a movie. I don't think I've ever seen the movie, so maybe I'll have to watch that after I read the book. I know I have a copy of it somewhere in the house, but I couldn't find it, so I'm going to have to find it and set to work on that. Another book that I don't have on hand but I'd really like to try reading is I Married Adventure. It's by Osa Johnson. Her husband was an explorer, you know, out in the jungle, out on the savannah, and she went with him. If you've heard of her, it might have been from the Animal Kingdom Loft. In the Sunset Lounge, there's like a whole wall of photos, and there's a photo of Osa holding like a whole bunch of little cheetah cubs, and there's a copy of the book. It has like zebra stripes on it. Unfortunately, it's behind glass, so I don't think they lend it out. Anyway, I've tried to find this book in the past. I don't think I had much luck finding an ebook, but I'm gonna look again, or I bet it wouldn't be too hard to find a used copy, because I just being at the Animal Kingdom Lodge again on our recent trip and seeing that book again made me realize I need to sit down and read it. I mentioned Demons by Dostoevsky. This is also often translated as The Possessed in my last video. My brother, Porthos, is a huge Russian literature buff, and he recommended this. I did not get very far in it, I'm afraid, this past month, but I'm absolutely determined to tackle it and get through it, so definitely making this a priority this month. I have also been reading some mysteries by G.K. Chesterton. I've been reading a couple of the Father Brown mysteries, which are really good. So interesting, so exciting. Of course, I love theology, so I do really enjoy that Father Brown is the mystery-solving priest, and of course there are some really interesting, just tiny little discussions of theology sprinkled throughout. I think the writing is really beautiful too. This is from the Blue Cross. Between the silver ribbon of morning and the green glittering ribbon of sea, the boat touched Harwich and let loose a swarm of folk, among whom the man we must follow was by no means conspicuous, nor wished to be. I haven't read a whole lot of G.K. Chesterton, so it's been really fun to visit the Father Brown stories. I'd also like to try this one. Look, isn't this cover just lovely? It's The Poet and the Lunatics, and this is also a series of mysteries, although it doesn't feature Father Brown. I guess it features another crime-solving character. Anyway, I think I'll wrap it up there. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'd love to hear from you what you've been reading recently. Do you have any fun reading plans for summer? Any books you're hoping to get to at the beach or anywhere? If you're not subscribed yet, I hope you'll hit that button. I post new videos every single week. I do have a whole playlist of all the bookish videos that I've uploaded, so I'll make sure I link that in the end screen, which will be popping up now any second. I hope you guys have a magical day and a bookish day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!